Walls of Destiny. Part 2. Beyond the Walls. Chapter 4. The king is mad. The soldiers looked at one another, grinned, and looked back at Mylo. King Nemeshad, king of Ashdorn. He wishes you to come to his castle so that he may speak with you. Mylo was quite confused. Well, how does he know me? And how is it that he is expecting us? Who knows? The king is mad, said the leader with a somewhat sarcastic laugh. Another soldier, younger and quieter than the leader, offered Mylo water and food. Here, you look famished. There's a watering hole just ahead for your elephant. You can rest there for a while, and afterward, we'll take you to see the king. Mylo didn't feel like he had much choice in the matter. If it's rest I get, I suppose I can't complain. But the nagging feeling in his gut told him that there was more to this than they were letting on. Though Mylo didn't say it aloud, Jack seemed to sense his unease. Perhaps not, Jack murmured in his mind. But they seem pleasant enough, don't you think? Mylo wasn't sure what to make of the men. Something about their story felt off, but he decided to go along for now. Are we in some kind of trouble? He asked, his voice hesitant. Trouble? Not at all, said the leader. Why is it that you would think that? The man had a deep voice, not unpleasant but deeper than Mylo's. He spoke with a hint of joviality and charisma, but Mylo still had his suspicions. Well, no reason in particular, said Mylo. It's just that we haven't had much luck since we have come to Ashdorn. The leader's grin widened. Luck? Not to worry. Your luck is about to change, my friend. They continued on their way, the march slow and steady until they reached the watering hole. It was a peaceful spot, with a thin trickle of water running over smooth stones. The men stepped back, allowing Mylo and Jack to rest alone. Mylo noticed they could have easily fled if they wanted, but exhaustion was beginning to set in, and even if they wanted to flee they wouldn't have gotten far. However, it was reassuring to at least have the option. An hour passed, and Mylo and Jack both fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from the long days of wandering. They awoke to the smell of warm tea and the clinking of dishes. The soldiers had returned, carrying fresh fruit and nuts, as well as more water for Jack. Take your time, one of them said with a smile. We'll leave when you're ready. Grateful but still unsettled, Mylo accepted the food and gave a quiet nod. After a brief rest and a drink, he gathered his things, and the group set out once again. The road leading to the king's fortress was just minutes away. The landscape shifted as they traveled, from the stark, lifeless expanse of the wasteland to the sparse greenery of struggling birch trees and wild thistles. Ahead, the land seemed to breathe again. Green fields began to emerge, dotted with small trees and shrubs that fought for life against the barren ground. As they continued, Mylo asked once more, what could a king possibly want with me? The leader shrugged. We don't know, but it's not for us to question. He flashed Mylo a grin, though it didn't fully put him at ease. Night was falling, and the pale light from both moons illuminated the road ahead, casting long shadows across the land. Mylo saw distant farmers tending their flocks, their eyes sharp for predators that came out on such moonlit nights, wolves, bears, and creatures of the dark. They watched with curiosity, especially as Jack lumbered past, an elephant being a rare sight indeed in these parts. Soon, the group arrived at a small village where the horsemen turned eastward. They continued for another mile, leaving the village behind, the road growing increasingly isolated. Then, in the distance, the silhouette of the fortress appeared, massive and looming against the night sky. As they drew closer, Mylo could make out the fortress's details, 25-foot walls, an imposing gate, and battle towers rising at each corner. A walkway ran along the top of the walls, creating a continuous barrier of stone. The soldiers identified themselves to the guards, and the great gates swung open, revealing the castle nestled within the fortress. Mylo and Jack followed the soldiers through the gates and into the heart of the stronghold. It was an impressive structure, smaller than the walled city, but sturdy and fortified. The king's residence, a smaller stone castle, stood within the fortress walls, surrounded by the bustle of the military encampment. Mylo and Jack were led to a stable where the elephant could rest, and the soldiers informed Mylo that a room had been prepared for him in the king's castle. The king is asleep, one of the men said. He'll see you tomorrow. Mylo raised an eyebrow. So, I can't leave? The soldier smiled, his tone warm but still guarded. You're free to go whenever you wish. You're not a prisoner. But the king would very much like to meet you first. The door to Mylo's quarters opened, and he stepped inside. The room was large, luxurious by his standards, with a full kitchen, a private bathroom, and even running water, a rarity in these parts. The furnishings were elegant, with hand-woven carpets and heavy curtains, and the bed looked incredibly inviting. Mylo, tired from his journey, couldn't help but wonder what the king's rooms must be like if this was a guest chamber. After a much-needed bath, Mylo sank into the bed, the soft linens enveloping him in comfort. It had been weeks since he'd slept in a real bed, and he welcomed the reprieve. His mind wandered as he drifted off to sleep, and he dreamt of an elephant wearing a crown and golden armor, prancing about and proclaiming itself king. But as the dream faded, Mylo realized, I am that elephant. His heart raced as he awoke, disoriented, just as the first rays of morning light began to filter through the curtains. The sound of servants entering his room startled him. They carried a large, covered platter and set it on a table beside the bed. "Breakfast, sir," the servant said, bowing slightly as he unveiled the meal. The spread was lavish: pork, eggs, peppers, bread, and milk, all freshly prepared. Mylo's stomach growled, but after so many days without proper food, he found himself unable to finish the meal. His body had shrunk from the long hours of wandering the wasteland, and he felt guilty for wasting such a carefully prepared breakfast. Before leaving, the servants informed Mylo that the king would like to meet with him in the great hall once he had finished. Mylo took a deep breath, still unsure of what awaited him. He dressed in the fresh clothes left by the servants and set out to find the king. Mylo was unfamiliar with the layout of castles and had no idea where the great hall might be. The hallway stretched on before him, lined with doors on either side, most of which were closed. He dared not open them, not wanting to intrude on any important royal goings-on. As he passed by, he peered into the few open doors, but they seemed to lead to guest rooms, much like the one he'd been given. He kept walking, hoping to stumble upon some sign, some direction. Eventually, the narrow corridor opened up into a much larger room, one with towering ceilings and ornate columns, 4 times as spacious as Mylo's own quarters. At the far end of the room, an older man in a purple robe was stacking books in an oddly meticulous manner. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for the Great Hall," Mylo said hesitantly. The man jumped up with surprising energy, his graying, uncombed hair bouncing as he squinted at Mylo, his gaze flicking over him as if trying to place him. A wide, welcoming grin spread across his face. Ulgrim, I'm so glad you've come," the man exclaimed with uncontained enthusiasm. "We've been expecting you for so long." He slowly turned to look out a large window, his hands clasping together. "Things will be different around here now, I can assure you that," he muttered to himself, as though thinking aloud, before returning to his peculiar task of stacking books in the middle of the floor. "For high, 5 across. No, wait. I need one more. Let's see." Mylo blinked in confusion, realizing that this must be the Great Hall, and this must be the king. As the soldiers had hinted, he did appear a bit mad. And not only that, this king had confused him with someone else entirely. Ulgrim? Who was this Ulgrim, and why was the king so certain that Mylo was him? A pang of unease shot through him. Should he mention the mistake now? Should he correct him? Mylo hesitated, weighing his options. What if he told the king he wasn't Ulgrim and was turned away, or worse, punished for some perceived offense? Yet, if he waited too long and the king found out later, who knew what might happen? He decided it was probably best to clear things up now. "Your Highness, I believe there's been a mistake," Mylo began, his voice faltering. "Oh goodness, a mistake? A mistake?" The king's eyes widened as he sprang to his feet, suddenly frantic. He pressed his hands to his head and dashed around his stacks of books, as though searching for an answer. "Let's see now. For high, 5 across, arranged by author. No mistakes so far, no, let's see." Mylo glanced at his hands, unsure how to proceed as the king muttered to himself, lost in his thoughts. "No. What I mean is, my name is Mylo. Mylo T." Before he could finish, the king shot to his feet again, his eyes gleaming with sudden clarity. He strode purposefully toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the horizon. Ulgrim," he said with a sigh. "They're after my treasure, you know. Thieves and tyrants, all of them. They'll never get a single gold piece. Not while I still breathe." He paused, his attention flicking back to Mylo with a slightly wild gleam. "It's buried here, Ulgrim. But where, I can't seem to remember. The map, yes, the map." The king's voice rose in sudden excitement as he began pacing again. Tapping his forehead repeatedly, he continued, "It's in my head. But I don't know how to read it." The king turned back to his book stacks, now inspecting them with an obsessive intensity. Mylo stood awkwardly, not sure whether to speak, or if it was even wise to interrupt. The king's behavior was growing stranger by the moment, and he had no idea how to respond. For a few long moments, the room was silent except for the king muttering to himself, his focus fully absorbed in his books. Mylo shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to wait or leave. Finally, the king turned around, breaking the silence with a sudden grin. "You'll stay for a while, won't you, Ulgrim? We could use a man like you around here," he said, his tone shifting to a more hopeful note. Mylo, caught off guard by the abruptness of the question, hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what the king expected of him, or what else he could possibly say. "Yes," Mylo answered, not knowing what other response the king might accept. "I suppose I could stay for a while." "Excellent. If you would like, Mr. Whitfurrows can show you around our little fortress." The king's voice was suddenly enthusiastic again, and he leaped to his feet, his arms twisting and turning as if he were about to dance. "Whitfurrows," he yelled. "Whitfurrows, come here at once. Damn fool. He's never around when I need him, and always in my way when I don't." With that, the king marched into an adjoining room. Moments later, he returned with Mr. Whitfurrows in tow. Whitfurrows was a small, plump man, dressed in a bright, colorful outfit with a wide-brimmed orange-red hat. His bushy white eyebrows jutted out like twin tufts of cotton, and his long mustache drooped almost comically. He shuffled along with the aid of a cane, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark, clouded lenses. This whole thing just gets stranger and stranger, thought Mylo to himself. How is a blind man supposed to show me around? Whitfurrows gave a soft tap on Mylo's shin with his cane. Ulgrim, this must be, he said matter-of-factly. Yes, yes, the king cheered, twisting his hips dramatically as if dancing to an invisible tune. He's here to shake things up around here. Whitfurrows, if you would, show Ulgrim around our fine fortress. Thank you, your highness, Mylo said with a small, polite bow, though inwardly he felt the weight of the king's delusion pressing on him. Bah, call me Nari. Now off with you, he said with a giddy laugh as he waved them away. As they walked, Mylo couldn't help but marvel at the old man's surprising agility. Despite being blind, Whitfurrows seemed to know exactly where he was going. He swept his cane in front of him with precision, as if reading the air itself. From around here you are not, Whitfurrows asked, tapping and poking with the cane. Ulgrim, was it? I'm from far off to the east in Atlantia. From Goodfield, Mylo explained, choosing his words carefully. And as I've tried to tell the king, Nari, my name isn't Ulgrim. It's Mylo. I think there's been some sort of mistake. Mistake, perhaps, Whitfurrows murmured, a slight chuckle in his voice. Mylo, your name may be, but Ulgrim you are now. And in good company you are. Whitfurrows, my name is not. Mylo's frustration deepened. There was so much he still didn't understand. The bizarre behavior of the king, the strange acceptance of his mistaken identity, and now this blind man speaking in riddles. What had he walked into? All he wanted was to rest and move on, but he found himself caught up in this odd little town, its people treating him as though he belonged. Still, part of him couldn't deny the comfort he felt here. The bed in the fortress was a far cry from the hard ground he'd been sleeping on for several weeks, and the meals and care they'd shown him were far more generous than he was accustomed to. Perhaps, for a little while longer, he could enjoy the luxury and the hospitality, then leave, once his strength had returned. Whitfurrows continued to guide Mylo through the fortress and its surroundings. Mylo was struck by the way the old man navigated with such ease despite his blindness. The two spent hours touring the place, with Whitfurrows pointing out various buildings, halls, and landmarks, as though he were describing them in vivid detail. It was as if he could feel the entire city in his bones. As they walked, they were often stopped by townsfolk who greeted Mylo warmly, eager to hear more about him and his adventures. Many of them asked about Jack, wondering how Mylo had come to befriend an elephant. The questions flowed endlessly, and Mylo found himself recounting stories of his travels, though he couldn't bring himself to share everything. There were some parts of his past, of his journey, that he didn't want to relive or speak of. One place that piqued Mylo's interest was the blacksmith's forge. Whitfurrows had insisted that it would be good fortune for Mylo to try his hand at crafting a sword with his own hands. Mylo smiled inwardly, knowing that he was no stranger to the art of smithing himself, having spent years honing his skills back in Goodfield and more recently, in the walled city. Still, he played along, letting the old man think he was offering something new. At dusk, the town seemed to come alive for some kind of celebration. The smell of roasting pork filled the air, and Mylo could see that the townsfolk were gathering around a large bonfire in the center of town. His curiosity piqued, he joined them, listening as the fire crackled and the warm glow bathed the surrounding faces. As the night deepened, Mylo found himself telling stories of his life and his journey, how he first met Jack, how they'd traveled across desolate lands, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. He even recited a few of Yushimei's parables that he was able to recall, though he wasn't sure how much they would resonate with these people. He asked if they had a village father, but the answer came back as a strange, almost casual response. They believed in the Frielsend, the Redeemer, but they did not have the same rituals or priests as the Breterians. For them, belief alone was enough to free them from the bonds of fate. The festival felt unlike anything Mylo had experienced before, lively, lighthearted, and free from the heavy burdens of politics or war. There was laughter in the air, meat in his cup, and roast pork on his plate. For a fleeting moment, Mylo allowed himself to forget about the reason for his goal of getting to River's Edge. It was easy to get lost in the warmth of the fire and the company of the townsfolk. Though he still felt weak from the long days of travel and deprivation, Mylo enjoyed the revelry. He ate and drank deeply, feeling the weight of exhaustion slowly lift from his bones. As the night wore on, Mylo finally grew tired and made his way back to his quarters. The laughter from the bonfire faded as he walked, and the quiet of the fortress settled over him. The next morning, Mylo woke with a mild headache, the result of his indulgence the night before. He spent most of the day resting, trying to recover from the excesses of the previous evening. Jack, too, was resting, enjoying the fruits and hay that had been generously offered by the townsfolk. Loscroll and Longfellow arrived at the palace of the king of Tyrevant, escorted by the camel riders who found them. They grunted and motioned for the two to dismount. Their horses were stabled, and the two men were directed inside the palace. Finival, they commanded as they poked Loscroll in the shoulder. The palace was impressive. Loscroll and Longfellow marveled at the detail. The whole place was carved out of limestone blocks, many of which were painted and covered with strange symbols or writing of which neither man was familiar with. There were 4 great columns on each side of the entrance. The inside was brightly lit. There were large openings on parts of the ceiling to let in sunlight, and in other areas there were oil lanterns lining the walls, along with beautiful paintings of lakes and deserts. They were led inside, down a large hallway and up a flight of winding stairs and into the king's chamber. They were commanded to kneel before the king, and the letter was given to him by one of the soldiers. The king appeared to carefully read the letter. He sent for someone, and another man came into the chamber and also examined the letter. The two exchanged words for a few minutes. The man turned to the 2 Midlandians. "Do you know what this letter says?" spoke the man in the common language. "No. We were just told to find the king and give him the letter," said Loscroll. "It says that you 2 were in the group that prevented Wolf and his men to destroy our northernmost watchtower. Is this true?" asked the man. "It is true." "Do you have any proof of this?" he asked. Puzzled, Loscroll looked at the man. "No." "And do you have any proof that this Burdoc the Red wrote this letter?" "Only that it is his stamp that the letter is signed with," said Loscroll. "You," said the man looking at Longfellow. "Why have you come here? What is your purpose?" Longfellow looked at Loscroll wondering if he should answer. Loscroll gave a nod. "Isn't it in the letter?" "I am asking you. Why are you here?" "Burdoc sent us on this mission. The COL government is trying to take control over all the lands. We are here to try to form a resistance," said Longfellow firmly. "Why should we believe you?" asked the man, this time looking at Loscroll. "Burdoc said you would recognize the seal and—" "You could have stolen the seal," interrupted the man, then speaking again to the king. The king then spoke something in his language, and the man said, "The king wishes for you to stay in our jail until we can verify what you say." Loscroll sprang up. "We are here to help you, and help stop the COL. This is unacceptable," he cried. The guards seized them both and brought them to the palace jail. "Do not worry. You will be made comfortable. And if you are telling the truth, your stay will be brief." After weeks of travel, Burdoc finally arrived at the mountain pass that led to the Baruni village where their leader resided. He set up camp there and would begin the trek first thing in the morning. Burdoc was one of the very few humans who dared to befriend the creatures. Most wizards even shied away from them. It had been a long time since he had spoken their language, so he began to practice the strange speech on his way to the village. Baruni villages were almost always carved into the sides of mountains and were not exactly villages. They were more like underground cities which used steam and geothermal energies to power their machinery, open doors, and keep them warm. In times past, the mountain folk would come down and visit Burdoc, and he would visit them, and they would exchange knowledge that they had achieved about all aspects of science, though what they could offer almost always surpassed what he could offer. He walked next to Apex using his wizard staff to aid him as they made their way up the winding and rocky path. The air grew cooler as the altitude increased. A curious lone wolf seemed to follow them the entire way up, but was never aggressive in any way. Burdoc knew that where there was one, more were close by, so he remained cautious. Finally, he arrived at the cave door, the entrance to the mountain village. It was marked only with a symbol whose meaning was known only to a few. He placed the bottom of his staff onto the symbol, then carefully moved it to the right about 5 inches and pushed it into a small hole. It was a doorbell. He sat down and waited. Soon the sound of stone on stone could be heard as the door slowly slid open. Burdoc arose to see the mountain folk. They immediately recognized him and began to cheer. He brought his horse inside, and the door slid shut behind him. The little people guided him inside while others came down to see what all the commotion was about. They too gave a cheer, and one of them brought a gift to the wizard. It was a beautiful object made of different types of gems and metals. It shined and glistened. Burdoc examined it. Its nature was so unique and complex that he would have to come back to it at another time to fully understand what the gift's purpose was. In the meantime, he just smiled and thanked them. The creatures were very excited, as they did not usually get visitors, and they all wanted to talk to him. They chattered at him all at once and so fast that he couldn't understand them, though he tried. "Dear creatures," he said with a hearty laugh. "I would very much like to speak with Jotaja." They chattered with excitement and led him down a long hallway. The faint sound of machinery could be heard churning in a mechanical rhythm. An occasional burst of steam could be seen billowing out of large bronze pipes, adding warmth to the air. Marvelous, thought Burdoc. These creatures could rule the entire world if they chose. To the left there was a large colorful curtain bejeweled with emerald, aquamarine, and peridot, and other gems of blue and green. One of them entered and could be heard speaking to the leader of the Baruni. He came back out and motioned for Burdoc to enter. Burdoc," said Jotaja as he got up and gave Burdoc a formal Baruni greeting. "Please sit," he said as he took his seat on his golden throne. Jotaja was larger and taller than the other Baruni. His skin was a shade lighter and his features more prominent. The last time they had spoken they both were much younger. He looked expectantly at the wizard and gripped his scepter. Burdoc sat and told him all of what was happening in the outside world. The leader looked puzzled, then sat back in his chair. "These things are all normal happenings in your world. Why have you come here to tell me all this?" "These are not our concerns. I have come to ask for your counsel and your help," said Burdoc. "What would you suggest I do? Send out my family to die in your human war?" Of course not. But I hoped you still cared at least in part for our world and might be able to offer some help or some idea because I am nearly out of ideas. I feel that our world will soon change forever. Is there at least some advice you could offer? There is none. If this is the only reason why you have come, then you have wasted your time, said the leader as he rose and began to walk into another room. Burdoc also got up. You have changed, my old friend. Soon the COL may be on your doorstep. Then what will you do? He said. Jotaja looked back right before he disappeared into the next room. I will deal with it when and if it happens. I have more immediate concerns than the petty squabbles of humans. Disappointed, Burdoc got up and went back through the ornate curtain and began down the hall toward the door. Where are you going so soon? Chattered one of the creatures. Please stay a while, cried another. I am very sorry, began Burdoc. I have urgent business that I need to attend to. I will come back and have a proper visit at another time. As Burdoc neared the cave door, he felt a tug at his clothing. He turned around and saw one of the creatures standing there dressed in a white tunic with strange letters woven onto the fabric that seemed to be filled with meaning. Yes, he said as he squatted down to the creature's height. I heard your conversation with Jotaja. He is our leader, but we don't all feel this way. You are correct. He has changed. I cannot help you, but I would like you to spend some time at our monastery. I appreciate your offer, but I must act now. I have already wasted too much time on a gamble. If you leave, you will still be gambling. You must stay and clear your mind and an answer may come. Burdoc paused and considered it. He knew the monk was right. The Baruni, especially the clerics, often had a knack for knowing just what is needed. I will stay and meditate at your monastery for 2 days. But if nothing comes, I must leave. Excellent. I will tell the others. The monastery was a short walk to another mountain and Burdoc was relieved that he didn't have to go all the way back down the mountain in the dark with wolves lurking about. The source of all the problems in the land seemed to stem from the very middle of the continent, the walled city of Idriaxlan. The steward of the throne, Harold Andfangle, had just claimed kinship over all the lands. A steward had the right to claim the throne if the throne were to go unclaimed for a minimum of 5 years, and if the steward had royal blood. Though he did in fact meet these criteria, the concept of kingship had been disregarded many years ago. Most of Midlandia, with a few exceptions, had settled on electing their leaders. Harold himself had been elected, but he and his officers managed to get enough support to bring back the royal house. This was made official just before Mylo and company returned. Harold paced back and forth in the war room awaiting his military council. Finally, you are here, he said as he marched over to the map of the continent that lie in the center of the room. I want forces sent to these cities, demanded Harold. My lord, if we sent forces to all these at once we would be spreading ourselves too thin, said one of the councilmen. Then Ashdorn and Sildlin should be first. They owe the most. Once we collect those taxes we should have enough to go after all the rest. Too long have we been lenient. We are running out of time. Sildlin will be easy. Even if we have to take it by force, said the man. Ashdorn will be more difficult. It will take days to muster the men and weeks to get there. And I believe they will not give up their wealth so easily. Rumor has it that Nemeshad has lost his mind. Let them fight back. We will take the whole damn country and put our men in charge, said Harold laughing maniacally. He paused, his look becoming serious. And that isn't all. I want the Iskal Dothaneb shut down. And I want every last wizard who will not work for us detained indefinitely. And I want all those associated with them interrogated. Why shut down the School of Natural Science? Won't it outrage the people, my lord? And how are we to detain wizards? Very slippery folk they are. The school is a breeding ground for wizards and a meeting place for dissenters. Shut it down. I care not how you shut it down. As for the capturing of wizards, I have a few of my own. And we can get them one at a time. And we will, said Harold tightening his fists.